I start, let's say, go Pats! Anyway, did you come out to hear me go for the buffet, the dinner? But I came to this district as a police officer back in the 60s, the early 60s, when the South End was a very different place than it is today. It's not even the same. As I walk around today, as I drive around, and even Captain Abbott would even tell you, because he was here years ago too as a young patrolman, and it was a vastly different place. I was assigned prior to come. I started my career in District 13 in Jamaica Plain, and then I went over to Roxbury at District 9, which used to be down on Blue Hill Avenue, and the corner of Blue Hill Avenue and Dudley Street. And I stayed there for a few years, and then they transferred me over to District 1, which was downtown Boston in primarily the North End area, where while I was there, I got involved in a controversy that we won't go into now. It's a story for another day. But the good citizens demanded my removal from that area. We'll talk about it another time. Anyway, I wound up here in District 4 because District 4 had a burgeoning, I should say at that time, Hispanic community. They were primarily people from Puerto Rico that were beginning to move into the area that's around the Villa Victoria, that area, before the Villa Victoria was even built. But they were kind of moving in there, and the police department really at that time had no input into that particular community. They really had no input. They didn't know who the people were, the movers and the shakers were, like they did with other groups that lived in the South End and around the South End. They wanted somebody to work in that particular area down here in the South End. So when I was assigned here to District 4, they assigned me to that South End because I could speak Italian. What that had to do with speaking Spanish, I don't know. But it was a foreign tongue. So they said, put him there. So, you know, I tried. So they put me down in that area, and myself and my partners, and we worked in that particular area. And I got to know a whole lot of people down there. And I got to know a whole lot of the the people that were community activists from that area and the different groups, and it became one of those type of things. And then they asked me to become a community service officer. It was a new concept that the police department had at the time. Prior to that, it's kind of a long story, I won't go into it, but the police department, they wanted the police department to have more contact with the general public than they had before. At one time, when I became a police officer back in 1957, probably 80% of the policemen assigned to a police district were patrol officers. They walked the beat. And a lot of those officers were on the beat for many, many years. I worked with police officers that walked the same beat for 25 and even 30 years. There was one police officer, I'll never forget him, his name was Griffin. He worked in District 13, and he used to have a school crossing. And he used to cross kids on their way to school that he used to cross their fathers. And so that was the way the police department was run there. So most police officers were assigned to the same beat, and over many, many years, they got to know everybody and everything about the particular area in which they covered. But in order to do that, and when I became a policeman, there were slightly over 3,000 police officers were assigned at the city of Boston. I don't know how many there are today, Captain. Probably maybe
2,100.
Maybe 2,100 tops. Does that include civilians too?
No, that's police. That's one police officer.
That's police officer. But there was like a little over 3,000 policemen. And somewhere along the line, the police department decided that the expense of keeping and maintaining a police department of that size, in particular when police officers retired. And in the Boston Police Department had a problem with retirements because the strike of 1919, I don't know if you people here heard about the Boston police strike of 1919. Anybody know about that? But in 1919, the entire Boston Police Department went on strike. And as a result of the strike, the entire Boston Police Department that went on strike was fired. So they had to hire, at that time, an entire police department almost all at once. So after 30 years, or 30 or 40 years, all those police officers that were hired in mass, all retired in mass. So that meant they had to hire again a lot. And so as years went by, that became very costly because once the police department had a union, they became, you know, the work benefits and the pay increases and so forth went up. The city looked at that and they said the expense of hiring the police officers is becoming so costly today, we no longer can afford to hire that many people all at once at one big, huge time. You know, it's a huge expense. So they come up with a plan. Do away with the walking men. Take the cops off the street and put them in cruising cars. And they called it rapid response. The theory was that if you called the police, that within seconds, policemen will be at your door. You know that thing. Well, it worked for a short period of time, but then it didn't work like it. The police officers lost contact with the public, more or less. The average citizen in the community never knew who the policeman was. You only saw cruisers zipping up and down the street with the blue lights on and sirens blaring. And they almost never, unless you were in trouble or something, you never saw the policeman. Because he was always in that vehicle. And it became a problem as the neighborhoods became problematic with the neighborhoods and crime and all those issues that every neighborhood has. They said, we have to do something about this, you know, we have to reach out to people, you know, and get the policemen more familiar with what's going on with the neighborhood. And they created the Office of Community Service. It was a federally funded program, actually. You know. So they asked me to do that, and I worked with Sergeant Ray Wood. His name was a hell of a police officer, by the way. And anyway, Sergeant Wood and I became the first community service police officers in the South End here. And our job primarily was to go into the community, meet with people like this. We'd come to a meeting just like this and would say, okay, we're here now. What's the problem? I mean, you know, and we'd listen to whatever problem you had, whatever issues you might have, and then we'd go back and we'd try to focus on those things and get it straightened out. We'd go back and we'd tell the captain, and the captain would say, okay, we'll put police officer there, we'll do this, we'll do that. You know, we'll try to solve the problem the best we can.